Hello and welcome to CBC New Brunswick's English Language Leaders Debate. This is New Brunswick Votes 2024, Leaders on the Record. Thank you for joining us. I'm Clare MacKenzie, host of CBC New Brunswick News at 6, and I'm here with CBC Provincial Affairs reporter Jacques Poitras. And of course, we're here with the leaders of the three parties that held seats in the legislature when the election was called. Susan Holt, leader of the Liberal Party. Blaine Higgs, leader of the Progressive Conservative Party. And David Coon, leader of the Green Party. Here's what's going to happen over the next 45 minutes. There are three themes with 3 questions per theme. The speaking order and order of closing statements has been determined by a draw with a representative from each party present. Each leader will have an allotted time to answer each of the questions. There will be no open debate. Let's begin with our first theme, health.
Mr. Higgs, first to the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, Mr. Higgs. All the parties are talking about collaborative care clinics as a way to improve access to primary care. The Liberals have promised 30 more. You have said there are more than 50 at the moment of various types. Why is it taking so long to roll out this model to more New Brunswickers? You have 90 seconds.
The challenge that exists is staffing levels and finding people in the right qualifications to staff facilities. So that's why we're increasing the scope of practice. You're looking at nurse practitioners, we're looking at paramedics involvement, we're looking at nurses themselves. That's why we changed just recently in relation to having our doctors pay a little pay structure differently to see more patients, and that they could come to a clinic without necessarily seeing the doctor, but see the nurse. Because what we're finding is that many times you don't necessarily need to see the doctor, but you do need access to primary care. So it is a process, but it is staff related, and it is an issue of trying to find people to build up these clinics. But that'll be the new model. That'll be people that will have access to a clinic, and that clinic access would be certainly available to patients right around the province. And I think the other big issue in terms of collaborative care is our collaborative care model where Vitality and Horizon work together to deliver health care across this province on a patient-first strategy. So we give patients an option maybe to travel to facilities that have an opportunity to do something differently or something more. And that's the change, that's the innovation. The other thing that we're looking at is how do you develop, and we've put $10 million in that just to study that process, a clinical information management system. So we can actually look across the entire province and just see how much access we can deliver, where we can deliver it, and again, utilizing our entire system. It's going to be delivered differently and better and with quicker access.
Thank you. That's your time. Ms. Holt, you have 60 seconds.
Well, one of the reasons why it's taking so long to advance primary care in this province is because we have a government unwilling to act and invest in health care and very inflexible about the approach they take. When we go door to door, we hear about this issue every day. 180,000 New Brunswickers don't have access to a family doctor. And even those who do have access, only 30% of them can get in to see their doctor within 5 days. There are people sitting at home today waiting for their doctor to retire, wondering what they're going to do if they find themselves on this wait list without access to care, and we hear these stories day in and day out. The current government had committed to 4 collaborative care clinics back in 2022. They said there would be one in Fredericton, one in St. Stephen, in Campbellton, and in Sussex, and as of today, not a single one of those clinics is open, and the commitments to opening them are well off into the future. We need a government that's going to act with urgency to deliver true collaborative care that responds to what doctors, nurse practitioners, and nurses are asking for.
Thank you. And Mr. Coon, you have 60 seconds.
Well, I think it's really important to distinguish between community clinics and family practices. We've got to transform primary health care. That's why we're going to make it a right to access primary health care, a right to eliminate waiting lists. We want to and need to transition solo doctors practicing in solitary practices into family-based, collaborative, team-based practices. So we would convert to start with 70 solo doctors' practices into team-based family practices. We need a funding model, though, for that. That's why this has taken so long. We need a funding model that will ensure that the other members of the team, the nurse practitioners, the dietitians, the mental health counselor, whoever's making up those teams, can be paid. And we don't have that funding model yet. We would put it in so it would function something like Medicare. And that's how we're going to end waiting lists, because you don't have to just go see the doctor on the team. You have a whole range of other health professionals that you can see when you don't actually have to see the doctor specifically.
Thank you. And Mr. Higgs, you've got 30 seconds to respond if you wish.
Well, I think we need to speak about the facts. Certainly the largest healthcare budget in New Brunswick history, so saying we're unwilling to invest is an absolute falsehood. The 180,000 is not an established number. It's a poll number. It isn't even, we don't know where it's even coming from because we know how many people are on the wait list for access. And we also know what that comparison is across the country. So again, a made up number. So how many of those are we going to experience during this campaign? Announcing what we've already done, it seems to be the philosophy. One announcement of things that are already happening. So maybe it's just our model presented differently, but it's less of our model.
Thank you, Mr. Higgs. And now to the next question.
Ms. Holt, the PC campaign has promised to not allow any new safe injection sites in New Brunswick because, according to Mr. Higgs, he wants to give people, quote, the drug treatment they need rather than the free drugs that they want. Would you allow any more safe injection sites? You have 90 seconds to respond.
Well, thank you very much for the question, because this is a challenge that we are seeing more and more across New Brunswick. Communities struggling as New Brunswickers experience more and more challenges with addictions, with mental health, finding themselves homeless across New Brunswick. We have more than 1,000 people who do not have a home or a place to sleep in New Brunswick today. And we see that crisis particularly acutely here in Moncton, where there exists the single safe injection site with Ensemble that helps make sure that people have clean drugs and that they aren't out on the street in public injecting themselves in places where we have children and other folks going by, that they can do so in a way that is supervised and that strives to reduce harm. Right now, we're not aware of any applications for new safe injection sites or any plans to expand those, but what we do need is real treatment for people who are struggling. We have a government that promised residential treatment beds here in Moncton, and I think we're 6 years later and we still haven't seen those beds realized. We have to put in place the services and the facilities to help people on a journey of recovery for the long term. And when you don't have the spaces to go to really get help, then you're forced to make some really hard choices on the ground. We want to see that commitment to residential treatment facilities across the province so that people who are struggling with homelessness, with mental health, and with addictions can be supported in their recovery.
Thank you, Ms. Holt. Mr. Coon, you have 60 seconds.
Safe injection sites ensure that someone's mom, someone's dad, someone's daughter, someone's brother doesn't die. So we would never prohibit the use of safe injection sites when communities want to go there as a way of saving lives, as a way of ensuring that we don't see more tragedies from our toxic drug supply. But that's just a small piece of the answer, of course. Drug addictions result from people self-medicating because of childhood trauma, because of mental illness, or because they become homeless and are just trying to figure out a way to stay warm and get by on the streets. So we need to have housing, critical care housing for people with wraparound services to help support them. And we need to put in place a much better mental health care system so people can have access to psychotherapy without having to pay. People have access to mental health counselors without having to pay. That we have a mental health system that actually serves New Brunswickers, and we don't.
Thank you, Mr. Coon. And Mr. Higgs, 60 seconds for you.
I'm not sure if you got an answer in either case. You certainly didn't from the Leader of the Opposition. We will not be opening any new injection sites. We will analyze the ones that are currently in communities and work with the communities and municipalities to see what benefit, the possible benefit they bring to the community and to the society. I think you don't need to look any farther than what we've seen happen in BC over the last 2 weeks, where Premier Eby has basically reversed his position on safe injection sites and basically saying we need an involuntary program where we help people help themselves. I don't know how much longer we can continue just to walk on by individuals that need our help, crying for our help in many cases, and think it's okay to keep them on drugs and have that be in existence. We're looking for people to have life. We're looking for people to have hope. We're looking for people to have a future. And that's what it's about. It's about helping those that are unable to help themselves. And it's not about doing the same thing. It's about a mental health and addiction treatment recovery program that is there for them, but it's a requirement because we need to do better.
Thank you, Mr. Higgs. And Ms. Holt, you have 30 seconds if you wish to respond.
Well, I think it's interesting that the Premier talks about needing to help people help themselves when his government hasn't taken the actions required to make that help available. That help doesn't exist under a Higgs government that makes promises about residential treatment facilities but doesn't deliver. The folks in Moncton have been waiting for those treatment beds for 6 years, and we still don't even see a shovel in the ground to advance that program. So while he tells people that he wants to help them help themselves, he isn't taking the action or making the investments required to address the problem.
Thank you, Ms. Holt. Next question, Jacques.
Next question is for Mr. Coon. Mr. Coon, in 2020, the PC government had a plan to close emergency departments at night in 6 small hospitals. That plan was canceled, but the challenge of staffing those ERs remains. What is the future of small hospitals? In 90 seconds, please.
The plan was worse than that. The plan also intended to close all the acute care beds in those hospitals, so they no longer would be functioning as hospitals except with emergency department operating partially in a 24-hour period. So it was worse than that. We need to ensure that our hospitals are able to manage themselves. Right now, there's very little authority embodied in the hospital administrators. There's no sense of all the departments in the hospital, the administrator working together to solve problems, to address human resource problems, because we have such a centralized management system now. Everyone reports up to managers outside of the hospital at a distance, who aren't familiar with what's going on the ground, who don't have an appreciation for the real needs or the sense of urgency about what needs to be done, when those working in the hospitals know well what needs to be done. So we would return and restore some of that authority that once did exist in the hospital administrators to manage their hospitals with the various departments, nursing, medical, surgical, emergency, and so on, so that they can actually solve problems in their hospitals and actively advocate for their needs. Because right now, the way it's set up, they advocate, they propose solutions, and they're not listened to. Their recommendations just bounce back at them from the Regional Health Authority and the Department of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Coon. Mr. Higgs, 60 seconds for you.
I think the real challenge here would be resources of people, resources of personnel. So we have to deliver care differently, and that means that an ER could be staffed differently. It could be staffed with a nurse that meets someone certainly at the ER, but then you have an advanced care paramedic, or you'd have a connection to a doctor virtually, and have that access that's there when you need it. We found that 24,000 people last year who called 911 when the ambulance got to the home didn't need to go to the hospital, but they thought they did. And so the advanced care paramedic dealt with it, and then they were treated fine, and then went on from there. So I think the point is we have to do healthcare differently. I'm encouraging more collaboration between our facilities, a greater connection with other facilities and other skill sets, so that we can deliver to rural communities, but do it in a different way. Because just to say that every hospital can completely have what every other hospital has, you know that in reality we can't find the people to do that. So let's think bigger, let's think how do we innovate.
Thank you. Ms. Holt, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you. There's 2 critical pieces to this question, but one is the importance of having emergency healthcare services in communities across New Brunswick, because certainly not everyone can travel to a big center, particularly not when they're experiencing a healthcare crisis. And New Brunswickers today are scared that when they show up at the ER, they won't be able to get served. They'll be waiting for hours and hours on end, or maybe they'll encounter a closed door like the gentleman in Sussex who was left on the curb without access to care. And people are really afraid that we have a premier that will continue to cut those services. In fact, that's why Bruce Northrup came back to be our candidate for Sussex, to ensure that healthcare access in Sussex for his community remained. We need to make sure our small hospitals are thriving, because we're taking the burden of primary care off of them. We need to transform how we deliver primary care in community with these collaborative care clinics that respond to what doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners tell us they want, an environment to practice together without the administrative burden that exists today.
Thank you. And Mr. Coon, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Well, the key thing is we've got to end the increasing centralization and, by the way, privatization of our healthcare system. We need to decentralize authority and decision-making back in the communities. And in fact, we would establish community health boards in our communities to help support the hospitals and clinics in their regions. We need to put healthcare back in local hands and maintain the administration in a central way, of course, but when it comes to management decisions,
that's your time.
they need to be made locally.
Thank you. Claire?
Thank you. Moving on to our next theme, budgets and priorities. And our first question here goes to you, Ms. Holt. Last December, the Education Minister acknowledged that the province had not built schools quickly enough to keep up with growing populations. How many new schools would you build and how quickly? You have 90 seconds.
Well, we certainly need more schools in New Brunswick because anybody who has a kid in school today, like I do, sees how our classrooms are overflowing, how we have portables upon portables in the schoolyard, and schools are sacrificing play spaces and outdoor spaces and others to try and accommodate the amount of children that we need to give a safe and healthy place to learn. We have a government that committed to schools, specifically a new school in the south end of St. John that has taken them 8 years to build. It can't take us 8 years to build schools in New Brunswick. We need to assess the population needs, we need to make plans that we revise on a regular basis, and we need to make sure that there are schools in place for every kid that needs to go. Right now, the information that we have from DTI tells us that there's 15 new schools that need built, and they need built right away. So we have to put plans in place that are going to make sure that every kid has a healthy and safe place to go to school, and it can't take 8 years to continue to build schools. We also need flexibility in these plans because right now the government tells municipalities where schools are going to go and what they're going to look like. But municipalities really want to be a partner in this conversation. They know their communities best and they want to be a part of deciding where to locate a school and how that school can meet their community's specific needs. Some of them need community spaces, healthcare clinics, childcare spaces. We need to get more flexible and stop having a one-size-fits-all approach to how we build new schools in New Brunswick.
Thank you, Ms. Holt. Mr. Coon, you have 60 seconds.
Well, in terms of the number of schools, we need to build the number of schools to meet the demand. I've never heard of students ever being on a waiting list to access education in a school. While we have people waiting on waiting lists to access health care, this is unacceptable. So we build to meet the need, and that's going to be different across the province, no question about it. But this speaks to, in some ways, the lack of preparation on the part of the past government to plan out for the needs of today. Once it was clear that our population was going to start growing, we needed to hit the ground running and ensure that the infrastructure, the services we needed to serve everyone who was coming and everyone who lives here were in place. And we missed the boat on that, so we need to build the schools that are required. Fredericton, for example, needs a 4th high school. Those schools are too packed with people and it's hard to learn in them.
Thank you, Mr. Coon. And Mr. Higgs, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you. You know, I'm proud to stand here today really reflecting a province that's never grown like this before in generations. We've had an influx of population of 90,000 people roughly that we've never seen it in this 2-3 year period. School construction is around 10. 6 years ago, we were closing schools because we didn't have enough students. We've had 9,000 to 10,000 new students enroll in our system this year. And new students, many immigrants, many from all over the world that are enrolling because they wanted to be part of Canada. And we needed them here in our province. The pain of progress is real. And to suggest that, you know, okay, we should have had schools just waiting is not real. To suggest we can build them overnight is not real. School locations are chosen by the population growth and proximity to all the students that are going to be served there. So yes, we have challenges in housing, we have challenges in school construction, and it's based on a province that's growing, based on a province that is progressing. And these challenges are that of growth. And I guess we certainly are able to meet them.
Thank you, Mr. Higgs. And back to you, Ms. Holt, for 30 seconds, please.
Thank you. Mr. Higgs says the pain of progress is real. Well, certainly New Brunswick students, teachers, and parents are feeling that today when we have a government that's only building 2 schools a year, but says that we need 10. With 300 schools in New Brunswick, that means it would take us 150 years to replace our housing stock. But none of our schools last 150 years, and we know that because we see that there isn't clean air in schools. We see the crunch of an inability to serve students with the spaces they deserve in order to learn and thrive.
Thank you, Ms. Holt. And on to our next question, Jacques.
This one is for Mr. Coon to start. What is the best way to get more housing and more affordable housing to the people who need it? You have 90 seconds.
Well, there's two things. One is we need to change the mandate for New Brunswick Housing. So New Brunswick Housing, Crown Corporation, originally was set up to ensure there was a proper supply of affordable housing for New Brunswickers back in the 70s and 80s. They've been reinflated, they're staffed up again, but their mandate doesn't match the need. So we would mandate them to focus like a laser beam on supporting and driving the development of non-market housing, non-profit housing, cooperative housing, which is by definition going to be affordable. The second thing is to incent the private sector to build housing with lower rents, is to change the way we assess the property values and therefore the taxes on rental units. We would tie the property assessment and therefore the tax rate or the tax amount to the rental income. So apartments with low rent would pay low taxes. Apartments with high rent, the owners would pay higher taxes. This would remove a tax burden for affordable apartments that would incent more construction of those types of buildings. I'm convinced that is the way to go on this. Tie the property assessment to the rental income from the properties, and we will see more affordable apartments, low-rent apartments built. It's an innovative and a bold solution, but we need bold ideas now to solve some of our pressing problems.
Thank you. Mr. Higgs, you've got 60 seconds.
Thank you. Just a quick correction. Another misstatement, I would believe, from the Liberal leader. We're building actually 10 new schools, either 6 new ones and 4 in a state of major renovation. I'm not sure where the 2 came from, and maybe it doesn't matter. The idea of certainly subsidized housing and the growth of MB housing was started after 40 years. It didn't exist. So ramping that up and getting a program understanding where do we have the greatest needs throughout the province. We know that with many properties flipping hands and many properties coming into a case with the rising costs of goods, with the rising costs of rent, that we've seen people move out of affordable housing. We've seen people have to move, in, maybe even with families and such, to find a place to be, and that is not appropriate. And we're changing that. We have multiple plans that we're working in terms of ensuring people can stay in their home, whether it be through the rent control, whether it be through actual rent changes and dealing with that, but whether it be affordable subsidized housing, on which we have hundreds underway at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Holt, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you. There's multiple things that we need to do to get more housing built in New Brunswick. The first is to learn from what's working in our neighboring provinces, and that's why a Holt government will take the provincial tax off multi-unit developments in order to spur the development of more housing in New Brunswick. We've seen that work in Nova Scotia and PEI because those provinces have more than doubled the amount of new housing starts, while New Brunswick can't even meet its own targets. We're watching investment move to our neighboring provinces instead of being invested here in New Brunswick. So after we take the PSTF new housing developments, we have to completely reform the property tax system. Right now, it doesn't encourage the kind of affordable developments or the kind of diversity of housing stock that we need here in New Brunswick. So a Holt government will undertake a complete overhaul of our assessment and property tax system so that New Brunswickers are paying a transparent, fair, and competitive rate for their property taxes that helps us build the society we need. We also need to build more public housing and to partner with our not-for-profit and cooperative organizations that are building the housing that people who can't pay market rates need.
That's your time. Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Coon, for 30 seconds.
One of the things that's happening is we're losing affordable housing at an incredible rate. So we need to put in place permanent and effective rent caps to keep people housed in their housing that's already affordable, to prevent those unaffordable rent increases from driving people out of their homes. Someone purchase and attach them to the apartments, so people who purchase those buildings end up evicting people, paying their low rents, and then ratchet up the rents for everyone else. So we're going to put rent caps in.
Thank you, Mr. Coon. Next question.
Mr. Higgs, your HST cut would eventually reduce government revenue by $450 million a year, but you're projecting surpluses of less than $40 million in the next couple of years. That's not a lot of wiggle room. How do you avoid cutting services?
So when we project tax cuts, we believe that actually people can spend money better than government. And when we look inside of government how we can do things more efficiently and we can actually improve our performance with what we've spent and what we are spending. Actually, we see, and no one ever says government is running things as well as it could be. No one ever says that we couldn't find better results and innovative solutions. An example of that is on healthcare. We have $1 billion more per year we're spending on healthcare than we were 5 years ago. But there would be those that say spend more money in healthcare and it'll get better. And I will say we need to find a way to do healthcare better. We need to find a way to, in terms, utilize the entire network, to have virtual care systems. It'll be a major shift to what we do today. Having our two health authorities work together rather than compete with each other is going to be a major shift change to what we've seen in the past. So for me, it's doing things differently. It's doing things better. It's managing better. We've tried to spending more money. We've done that now for every government, and we've done it. We've spent more money probably than most governments in our term. But we need to focus on how do we get better results for taxpayers' dollars. Because spending more money that taxpayers have to put forward with new tax increases. I've committed to not only reducing the HST, but also not raising taxes on individuals, not increasing income taxes. Now, I would like to see my colleagues make that same commitment. And to think we're going to, spend a finite money on healthcare and it's going to all of a sudden get better, it's not realistic. But we've now got the management structure in place. We now have the system in place to actually look at better results and compare one hospital to another.
Thank you, Mr. Higgs. That's your time. Ms. Holt, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you. I think it is worth noting that the Premier has made the single most expensive campaign commitment of anyone on this stage. And in fact, his commitment is more expensive than the entire platform that a Holt government is going to put forward with that single expense. And then to hear him say that New Brunswickers are better at spending their money themselves sounds a lot to me like he thinks we're moving into private health care, where New Brunswickers are going to spend their money to access health care, when New Brunswickers all everywhere need access to health care regardless of their means. We think you need to make smart investments in our health care system, because what the Higgs government is doing now is not working. More people than ever don't have access to primary care, and that isn't something that a New Brunswicker can fix themselves out of their pocket. We need to have smart ways to reduce taxes on New Brunswickers, which is why our team is going to take 10% off of New Brunswickers' power bills. We're going to reform the property tax system. We're going to take the 4 cents a litre off of gas that Mr. Higgs put in place to help people pay the bills.
Thank you, Ms. Holt. Mr. Coon, you have 60 seconds.
We have a state of emergency in our healthcare system. It is code orange. Everyone has to get on deck, and it's going to require a generational investment to fix the problem, to fix our healthcare system. I'm not going to abandon New Brunswickers to a crumbling healthcare system. That's what Mr. Higgs wants to do. It's unbelievable to me. We need to make those investments. The investments we're proposing to fix the healthcare system once and for all are close to $400 million, $380 million, and that money is required to fix healthcare. That's the money that Mr. Higgs wants to eliminate from the budget, to cut public services, to hamper our ability to fix the healthcare system in an HST tax cut. We can't afford that. New Brunswickers can't afford it, and the health system certainly can't afford it. We've got to make that generational investment, and we will, to fix a healthcare system that some people now are saying will never be fixed. I'm not giving up on it. We can't give up on it. Without healthcare, we have nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Coon. And back to you, Mr. Higgs, for 30 seconds.
Well, it's interesting that the lack of truthful statements continue. The fact that this is some suggestion of a move to private health care, there's no foundation for that whatsoever. The fact that more people need health care than ever before. Yes, we have 100,000, 90 to 100,000 more people in our province, and yet it's still less than many provinces on a per capita basis, and less than it was just a short few years ago. And also, let's talk about 4 cents a litre. We're going to get rid of the carbon tax entirely, which will be 25 cents a litre. And if the Leader of the Opposition knew how it works on the actual payments for the regulated pricing, then she'd know exactly why that exists.
Thank you, Mr. Higgs. Moving on to our final theme, values.
Mr. Coon, the province is facing 2 major title claims by the Wolastoqey and Mi'kmaq nations that could be in court for many, many years. Another option would be to reach a settlement. If you were in charge, what would a settlement look like? And you have 90 seconds.
If I were in charge, we would be negotiating on Aboriginal title in this province with the Wolastoqey people, the Passamaquoddy and the Mi'kmaq, just as has happened in other provinces, in Quebec, in British Columbia, for example, where through hard, tough, long, but fair negotiation, they reached agreements around Aboriginal title, and we've seen it most recently in Haida Gwaii and the Queen Charlotte Islands, as we formerly knew them. We've seen it in northern Quebec with the Quebec Cree in the past. We've seen it with numbers of First Nations in British Columbia, where they also never ceded or surrendered land. So we need to live by the treaties we've signed, and that means figuring out how to best share the land, and we need to negotiate those Aboriginal title claims, not litigate on them. That's going to serve nobody. It's going to cost a bloody fortune. So we need to roll up our sleeves, get down to business, and talk and negotiate around the table. That's how we're going to solve this. But it does have to begin from a perspective of respect for Indigenous peoples, respect for First Nations, and a recognition that we are treaty people. We have legally binding treaties to abide by, and neither Liberals or Conservatives have been living up to our obligations under those treaties, and a Green government would.
Thank you. Mr. Higgs, you have 60 seconds.
Firstly, to distinguish, the legally binding treaties would be the reserve land that was once promised to the First Nations communities, and speaking of New Brunswick, and which has been eroded over the years. And we absolutely support the return of that. In fact, we're intervening in one case to support Elsipogtog in their claim that their reserve land had been depleted over the years. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about something that was not unceded territory, and it was not ceded territory, excuse me. And the idea is that we do not have that as a treaty right, and our entire province is being claimed as for ownership by the Mi'kmaq and the Maliseets. This is unique in Canada. This is very unique. And the situation here is they want the property value, they want taxes to come to them as such rather than the provincial government, taxes that we use for everyone. So there's a big distinction between reserve land that was taken away and then a lawsuit that's affecting the entire province. So if you want someone that is actually going to get to the bottom of this and ensure that people in this province, private citizens, are respected and we find a way path forward, we're doing that.
Thank you. Ms. Holt, you have 60 seconds on this.
Thank you for the question, Jacques. It's been really difficult to watch the state of First Nations relations in this province under a Higgs government. We have fallen behind with a government who does not want to listen, who does not want to come to the table, and who doesn't want to treat First Nations in this province with respect. When I heard that the news of the breaking of the tax agreements came from a conference call into a meeting of chiefs where the Premier got on the phone, said he was cancelling the tax agreements, and hung up with no forum for discussion, this is the core problem that we have to address. A Holt government would get out of the courts and get to the table to negotiate and work with First Nations to find a path forward that is in the best interest of everyone. And we can look around and learn from our neighbors, because even industry is taking a leadership position here that Premier Higgs refuses to follow, where we have industry developing partnerships with First Nations to the best interest of everyone who's trying to advance projects across this country. Yet here in New Brunswick, we're falling behind because of someone for whom it's his way or the highway.
Thank you. And back to you, Mr. Coon, for 30 seconds if you'd like to respond.
The chain of peace and friendship treaties that our forebears signed with First Nations starting in 1726 are enshrined in the Constitution of Canada. Those are the legal agreements under which we're supposed to be operating with respect to our relationship with First Nations, and we're not. So we would ensure that happens, and we would ensure that from a position of respect, that we sit down at the table and begin those negotiations.
Thank you, Mr. Coon. Next question.
Mr. Higgs, a Campaign Life coalition has sent out flyers that claim that some teachers want to facilitate a student's sexual transition without their parents knowing. Under current New Brunswick policy, that can't happen. We know that your party has no connection to these flyers, but will you acknowledge clearly that they present misleading statements to voters?
I think you certainly stated we have no connection to that group whatsoever, and the claims that they make, I mean, are their opinions. That's what we see from many folks is their opinions. I mean, this controversy that arose from basically a policy that would suggest that parents should know what's happening in the schools and should be consulted in many ways and give their consent to minor-age children and the decisions being made, which we find that is certainly relevant today in every other aspect of what they do. So there are many people that will come out in the sense that whether I agree or whether I don't agree to what they say, because I've had it through my campaigns in the past with different unions that would come out and make all kinds of statements about me. We've heard it here today, statements that are made that are, in my view, very flippant, but maybe a soundbite that could be used later. So for me to say, do I disagree or agree with any of them or all of them, I just want to say that it's the free speech that's happening there that is not related to what either I agree with or don't agree with, and it's not related to any activity that I am pursuing.
Thank you, Mr. Higgs. Ms. Holt, you have 60 seconds.
Well, it's really disappointing to hear that the Premier refuses to condone the postcards or even acknowledge the fact that they attack teachers here in New Brunswick. But this is par for the course for him because he himself has attacked teachers in New Brunswick, saying that they're teaching kids to lie in our schools, saying that he wouldn't send his kids to public school today. I would like to see a Premier who is responsible for our education system defend the teachers who are working under extremely challenging circumstances today. And I have 3 kids in the school system. I'm very fortunate that we have amazing teachers that reach out to my husband and I to let us know what's going on, that we have open dialogue and conversation. These teachers are doing the best they can to keep parents informed, even though they aren't being given the resources they need to succeed in classrooms that are full of students without enough teachers, resource teachers, school psychologists, without enough space, without clean air. We have a Premier focused on distractions and not focused on the outcomes we want from our educational system, which is literate kids who can thrive.
Thank you, Ms. Holt. Mr. Coon, you have 60 seconds.
Well, clearly these flyers are vilifying teachers, just as Mr. Higgs has done. Teachers have never felt so disrespected in this province. They do their best to create a circle of love and care around their students and help them reach their full potential and ensuring that they can learn what's necessary. This is not recognized by Mr. Higgs. This is not recognized by these vile pamphlets. And Mr. Higgs seems to be quite comfortable with these pamphlets circulating. He hasn't condemned them, as we have, and he should if he thinks they're a problem. Mr. Higgs has thrown teachers under the bus. He's refused to apologize to teachers for doing that. There are big challenges in the education system, and Mr. Higgs has gone looking for problems where they don't exist. He's not a problem solver. He's a problem creator, and that's exactly what he has done with the changes to Policy 713.
Thank you, Mr. Coon. And back to you, Mr. Higgs, for 30 seconds.
Well, I certainly don't call the role of parents as inconsequential or insignificant, which seems to be the position of my colleagues. I find it really shocking that the discussion around parents and involvements with their minor age children is such a debate. I certainly agree that there's an opportunity that our system in education needs to change dramatically. We need teachers' voices to do that, not political voices. We need to get back to the basics in the classroom. And we've seen an exodus of people leaving our classroom. We need to find a way to get kids back to the learning that they need.
Thank you, Mr. Higgs. That's your time. And on to our next question, Jacques.
This is the final question, starting with Ms. Holt. You all have a range of experience in your careers, but could you each please tell us about a gap in your knowledge that you've identified, something you feel you still need to understand better, and how you plan to do that? Starting with Ms. Holt for 90 seconds.
Oh, well, that's an interesting question, and so I'm going to have to take a minute to think about it, because I've been fortunate to have worked in the private sector, to have led not-for-profit organizations, to have worked in government as a bureaucrat, and have seen how all those pieces fit together. I've worked in every corner of New Brunswick, and I've worked all over the world in different environments and in different cultures. I think maybe the one thing that I haven't done that I'm looking forward to learning, because it's going to be critical to moving forward, is work in a unionized environment and with labor relations. It's going to be critical that we improve labor relations in the province, because we have key relationships with teachers, with nurses, and with many others. And we've never seen the state of labor relations as bad as it is in New Brunswick right now. And so I don't have experience sitting down at those negotiating tables and working in unionized environments, and I'm eager to learn from both the expertise in the civil service and the people of New Brunswick who can support us doing that, because we need free and fair bargaining. We need workers to have their rights respected, and we need to be creating the conditions for people in New Brunswick to thrive. We rely heavily on a number of employees that are in unionized environments, and we hear from labor that they don't have a good relationship with this government, who eliminated the labor table that was a collaborative space where leaders came together to talk about priorities. And when they want to fight for appropriate wage increases like the folks at 1190 are looking for, they get a government that is not interested. So that's one gap that I'm looking to fill in my experience to best serve New Brunswickers.
Thank you. Mr. Coon, 60 seconds, please.
Well, I'm learning all the time. You know, as I travel the province, I learn things every day from people I meet, from people working in the school system, from people working in the health system, from people working in business, from people who have their own businesses, from people working in the labor sector, and on and on. I'm a lifelong learner, and you often don't know what you don't know until you learn it. And I love that. I love learning new things, and it really comes down to, are you open to learning new things? And are you listening? And I'm a great listener, and I'm a great learner, and that informs my work in the Legislative Assembly, my work on behalf of my constituents over the years in a way nothing else does. And I treasure those opportunities that do come to you daily in this work. So there's always lots to learn. And I continue to learn, and I put that to good work.
Thank you. Mr. Higgs, you have 60 seconds.
Real leadership is not easy. Every decision is not yes. And yes, it is tough to say no, or to make decisions that matter. Our province is excelling because we've made decisions that matter, and we know how to do that. And yes, it's not always the friendliest way to do it, but it's the way that's necessary, and everyone has to understand it's not government as usual. It's not government as it always used to be. It's government based on looking for the next generation and how we make it better. And I do have a lot of experience in dealing with, in negotiating, but measuring results and seeing if we're not getting those results, how do we do better? How do we create a different model, a different contract, a different incentive, a different program that sees results? Because it's not about how much money you spend for the same thing. It's about what can you get value for taxpayers' dollars with something better. But what have I learned, which is really a solid point for me, I guess, a solid point, is the people living on the street that has grown dramatically, living on drugs with no future, and the care they need and compassion they need to find a future and find hope.
Thank you. That's your time. And Ms. Holt, back to you for 30 seconds.
Well, I think it's interesting taking in what the Premier just said as he talked about trying to get results, when it seems that's a lesson he hasn't learned in government over these last years. We've watched his team abandon him. More than 12 MLAs quit the PC team because they didn't appreciate his leadership that showed that he couldn't learn. We're out there on the doors every day, knocking on the doors of New Brunswickers and learning from them, because every door you knock on has a New Brunswicker that has a different experience than yours. Being able to listen to them and then translate that into a team of people acting for New Brunswickers is critical.
Thank you, Ms. Holt.
That concludes the question portion of the debate. Each leader will now be given 1 minute for their closing remarks. And Mr. Coon, we begin with you.
Thank you. The problems facing New Brunswickers today are the culmination of 30 years of Liberal and Conservative governments making poor decisions and chasing failed policies. We need new leadership. A Green government would be different. Why? As Greens, we're grounded in a set of values based on fairness and respect for all people, communities, and the natural world that supports us. My 10-year record as an MLA and opposition leader is an open book. There will be no surprises about what a Green government stands for. In this election, we have the opportunity to turn the corner away from failed policies of red and blue and towards a sustainable future in which everyone can thrive. If you share this vision, I'm asking you to trust me and my candidates with your vote. We will respect and honor your trust every day in every action we take. Thank you, and good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Coon. And Mr. Higgs, you have 1 minute.
Tonight, you've heard a clear choice for our province. It's not about whether you personally like me or not. It's about our future and that of the next generation. Unlike many past governments, we have clearly made progress in the past 6 years, while facing major challenges. In this election, we could lose it all. We can keep building a strong province or choose policies that will put us back into the red. A progressive Conservative majority with a proven track record is the only choice that will keep us on the path to growth and sustainability. My opponents are promising to form a coalition, like we've seen with Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh in Ottawa. New Brunswick just can't afford that. On October 21st, we want to elect PC candidates from across the province. All of our candidates are ready to work hard for you in this legislature. Let's keep building. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Higgs. And Ms. Holt, you have 60 seconds.
It's never been more clear that New Brunswickers are ready for change. After 2 terms and 6 years of Blaine Higgs, Our healthcare system is worse than ever, and more New Brunswickers than ever are struggling to make ends meet. 180,000 New Brunswickers don't have a family doctor, and the costs of electricity, rent, and property taxes are going up and up and up. A Holt government will cut your wait time by putting in place collaborative care clinics close to home where you can get the care you need when you need it. We will cut the tax off of your power bill to save you 10% every month. We will cap rent, we will fix the broken property tax system, and we will put in place fresh school food so that no kid in New Brunswick goes hungry. You have a clear choice this election. Stick with Mr. Higgs and his wrong priorities, or choose a new team of 49 candidates that are focused on you. On October 21st, I ask that you vote Team Holt.
Thank you, Ms. Holt, and thank you to all of our leaders for joining us today. And a reminder to our viewers that CBC will have comprehensive coverage on all of our platforms leading up to and on election night, October 21st. Thanks for watching.